I'm not even sure how to start the enclosure discussion. Maybe Nick, did you want to just kind of jump in and see what your thoughts are for right now, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we might get hate mail for this, guys. I might have to hire a bodyguard because, the industry is very, very, very opinionated on enclosure size.
But she is an adult female. She is about 16, 17 feet and close to 200 pounds. I think her last weight was 166 pounds.
He's had his large anaconda for about 14 months. And in that time, on the vlog, he's fed it 19 times.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Welcome to episode number 72 of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is DILLON. Thank you very much for joining me today. This is the podcast that inspires others to push the limits of their reptile husbandry by promoting high-level, creative care, individualized for each animal. The fact that it is already the end of December is insane. I cannot believe how fast this year has gone by, but for the podcast, it's actually been a great year. Listenership has gone up. We've recorded some great episodes. The YouTube channel is growing, so thank you guys so much for your support. And as always, if you are looking for more information on the podcast, head to animalsathomenetwork.com, and there you can find all the shows that we produce, as well as all the episodes under those shows. So I've already recorded all the episodes for the rest of 2020. We have 2 more coming out after this episode, and then I'll probably take a week or so off for sort of at the end of December and then early January. I might skip a week or 2 of podcast just to give myself a break, as well as it can be challenging to find time to record during the holidays for both myself and guests. So we'll take that time off and then come back in the middle of January or so with some new content. I might not do that. I might end up recording an episode, and if I do, then that's great. But if you do see a little bit of a gap, that will be why. Of course, I'll give you guys more details on the later episodes this year, or what's left of this year. So the remaining 2 episodes are, one, I just recorded a great episode last night with Professor Zach Loafman from West Liberty University. We talk all about using natural history information to create great husbandry protocols, so more on that in the future. And then the last episode I recorded a couple weeks ago was a round table with Mariah from Reptifiles, TC Houston from Reptile Mountain, Joseph Brabin from JTP Reptiles, and Lori Tarini from her YouTube channel, Lori Tarini. Now, that conversation mostly focused on whether or not we can use the existence of natural type behaviors in captivity as a signal for welfare in captivity. So it was a really cool conversation. I think we talked for almost 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I think I want to make that as some sort of a little bit of a Christmas special, so I'll release it later this week. I don't want to release it on Christmas because I think no one's going to want to listen to a podcast on Christmas, or maybe you would want to listen to one on Christmas, but anyway, I'll post it earlier than Christmas, so if you do want to listen to it, then you can. So I'm thinking either the 23rd or the 24th, so watch for that one. That one's going to come out later this week, and that can be your holiday special. Thank you very much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some incredible reptile enclosures, a company that's really pushing the limits, make sure you go check out CustomReptileHabitats.com. There is an affiliate link in the description, as well as the show notes at AnimalsAtHomeNetwork.com. On today's episode of the podcast, I'm speaking with Troy Bumgardner and Nick Bella. Now, Troy is a reptile zookeeper out of the Denver Zoo, so he has an entire reptile section, but also part of that section is caring for a very, very large anaconda. I think it was 165 pounds. I'm kind of forgetting the length, but I think it was around 18 feet, so a very large anaconda. And Nick is a private keeper who has a few different species of large constrictor, including a green anaconda. Now, this conversation was sort of sparked by that video I did a few weeks ago talking about cage size and whether or not we should be keeping large constrictors in the hobby just due to the fact that they take up so much space. It's actually difficult to offer them a large amount of space. So Nick saw that video and we started chatting back and forth, and we thought it would be a good idea to have him on the podcast so we could hash out some of these ideas, and Troy was kind enough to jump on the episode as well and share some of his expertise. This podcast mostly focuses on 2 areas. The first area is enclosure size. What size of enclosures do these animals require? We mostly discuss anaconda, but we do talk about some of the other large constrictor species as well. And we also talk about feeding. There's so much blatant power feeding out there on the internet. So we discuss what is appropriate feeding for these large constrictors, and we discuss fasting and food cycling as well, which I think is something that almost everybody can implement at some point in their reptile husbandry. You know, you might not want to, you might not be comfortable with it, but this podcast will give you a better idea of why it's important and how you can start playing around with it without feeling like you're impacting your animal's health. I hope you enjoy this episode. Without anything further, here is my chat with Nick and Troy. All right, well, Troy and Nick, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for doing this on very much last notice basis. We just kind of whipped this together in the last few days.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, really excited. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Good. Yeah. Well, before we jump into the topics we want to discuss, maybe I'll just get each of you guys to just quickly introduce yourselves. So maybe we'll start with Nick. Just let everybody know kind of who you are and the animals you keep, and maybe just briefly how you got into the whole reptile world.
Sure. So my name's Nick Bella. I got my first snake after seeing the movie Anaconda. You know, I think all of us, I mean, you guys are probably around my age, so we all saw it, but I saw Anaconda around 97, 98. And I think by 99 or 2000, I had my first just common boa. I got my second one when I was 16, but due to family issues and just me needing to get out of the situation I was in, I couldn't give them the care that they deserved. So I gave them to someone who could. And I kind of vowed that I would do right by any animals that I got moving forward. So it was just a couple years ago. I kind of woke up one day and was like, I need to fill a space on my wall. I'm looking at it right now. I need to fill a space on my wall. How cool would it be to have like a nice snake cage here? So I went and got a common boa. Then I found out more about red tails and got one of those. And then I, saw that someone was getting rid of an anaconda. And I was like, well, money's okay. This is pre-COVID. Money's okay. Why not? So I got the anaconda. I got two more BC red tails, or red tail BC. And then I got the emerald, who was a nightmare. So, I spent some time volunteering and a little bit of work at a reptile rescue, but I'm a kind of obsessive compulsive. I don't want to say that because I don't want to offend anybody that is, but I'm very interested in the stuff that I get into. So, I kind of fell in love with it. And, guys like Troy, I think everyone should reach out to guys like Troy. So, yeah, he's a good resource to have. Sorry for bugging you so much, Troy.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Awesome. Well, that's a good origin story. And then what about yourself, Troy?
So my name is Troy Bumgardner. I am currently a reptile zookeeper at Denver Zoo. I've been a full-time keeper there for coming up on 6 years now, but I've actually been working / volunteering at Denver Zoo since 2013. So I've pretty much spent almost my whole life there. I've known from a very young age that I wanted to be a zookeeper, not necessarily a reptile keeper from the start. I actually wanted to be a great ape keeper, work with gorillas and primates. And then I volunteered with primates for 4 years, and that dramatically changed my mind.
It's almost just
really
like people
working with poop throwing toddlers. Oh gosh, yeah. But I've always loved reptiles. I was always that kid off in a ditch catching snakes, catching turtles, frogs, you name it. And then ended up getting a green iguana, decades ago as my first reptile, which was a horrible first reptile to get into. And end up keeping her for 14 years. And then the collection expanded from there. And now I've got, over 20 reptiles at home and caring for reptiles at the zoo. And so my life pretty much just revolves around reptiles right now. But yeah, a little bit of my work at the zoo. I'm a section keeper there. And so what that means is I am in charge for a specific section of the reptile building. I'm kind of known as the lizard guy over there. So I care for Komodo dragons, rhinoceros, iguanas, a bunch of different lizard species. I'm also fully trained in venomous, so I've got some venomous in my collection, or in my section, excuse me. And then I care for some big snakes like an anaconda, rock python. Hence the reason why I'm here tonight. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's I think we have 3 very different backgrounds and perspectives on things, so I think we can have a good chat here. So the point of this, actually, Nick was kind of the impetus to starting this this chat, where I had posted a video it was last week, just discussing enclosure size and sort of discussing some of the ethical issues when we get to some larger animals. It's easy to have a very large cage for a small snake, but it's not easy to replicate that size proportionally for a large snake. And that's what I started thinking, and I just made this video kind of off a whim, and Nick jumped in and was sort of agreeing with the message, and that sort of got us down the path of realizing, yes, there are many large snakes that are kept in enclosures that are just far too small. So why don't we start the conversation with enclosure size? And I think anacondas will kind of be the main theme tonight, but we'll probably also be kind of roughly discussing reticulated pythons and Burmese pythons as well. So as far as, I'm not even sure how to start the enclosure discussion. Maybe Nick, did you want to just kind of jump in and see what your thoughts are for right now, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah, honestly, we might get hate mail for this, guys. I might have to hire a bodyguard because, the industry is very, very, very opinionated on enclosure sizes. And, I might be on one end of the spectrum and someone else is down here, but for me, when I I get the arguments. You know, they can survive in smaller space. I get it. I do. I really do. And especially if you want a big collection. But I think there's a happy medium to be had. And I think people just assume that we should be able to keep whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want. And I think that's a problem. So myself personally, I've always wanted an anaconda. I mean, I remember the first time we were walking into the pet shop to look at the boas. I've always wanted one, but I was, you know, for me inside, I could not stuff a huge snake that spends most of its time inside the water or around the water into a cage with a water bowl that's probably not big enough for my Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. So I could have gotten one 5 years ago, 7 years, 5 years ago. You know, money wise and space size, are two different things. I didn't have the space, so I got an 11 by 6 by 6. It's 4 feet from the actual floor to the ceiling. She climbs literally everywhere that I did not expect to ever find her.
And this is your green anaconda, right?
Yes. She's 3 years old a couple days ago. She's 8 feet. She's 15 pounds, which I'm sure we'll get into that weight stuff later. But it was just, for me, I wanted something that was good enough for her and then some. And that's not even the final plan for me. I'm ideally in the next 5 or 6 years, COVID pending, I would like an 18 by 12 by 7 or 8 for her with a full out pool that I can like swim in and probably drown in. But, so it's, for me, it's just, that's something that I think that a happy medium again could be had, where we're not putting these animals in, that are 15, 16 feet, 200 pounds, especially in captivity, 250 pounds sometimes, in something that I wouldn't put my 8-foot boa in. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I just think there's a happy medium that can be found for the sake of the animal and for the keeper, but it might not always work out in favor of the keeper. And I think that a little bit of selfishness with animals is in the community.
Yeah. And, it is weird that I didn't really realize, because I'm not part of the big snake community at all, but there is very much a push to have things in smaller enclosures. So Troy, as far as you're concerned, because that's sort of what Nick is saying, we don't necessarily need every animal to be part of the private collection hobby. So as far as from your point of view, what do you think about having big constrictors at home? Do you think that, I don't think anyone's going to say we shouldn't keep them, but we probably want to have some rules and guidelines in there, or are you a hard no that they shouldn't be at home?
Oh, it's totally a toss up for me. I think it definitely is a discussion of ethics. I personally believe we should provide every animal the opportunity to display every possible natural behavior it can. And when we keep these animals in enclosures that limit the possibilities of displaying natural behaviors, it's just not a good situation. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm fortunate enough to have contractors come in and build me a custom enclosure for my anaconda that's 15 feet long, 10 feet deep, with a 5-foot deep pool. But not everybody has that luxury, but they still want to keep an anaconda, reticulated python, Burmese python, whatever it may be, but they make sacrifices in order to satisfy themselves. So again, just like Nick said, I think we're totally going to get hate mail for this. I have nothing against keeping large constrictors in the hobby. I have something against making sacrifices in order to keep large constrictors in the hobby. Mm-hmm. Whereas that's keeping them in small enclosures, keeping them in unsuitable environments in regards to heating, lighting, humidity, substrate, and all of that. That's where my real issue lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are certain things, like, I think if we're talking anaconda, we need water space. The amount of water space is really, really crucial. And if we're talking reticulated python, I think climbing space, and even Nick was saying, the anacondas climb too, so we can't really, cut them off super short as well. But if we're talking about enclosures, like, those two things need to be incorporated in those two species. And having just a water dish for an anaconda, that is just too much of a compromise, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, these are animals that spend, you could classify them as semi-aquatic. Mm-hmm. They spend a large portion of their life in water. And if we're not offering them that, I mean, we're already, setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do hear this one argument, especially on the anaconda side, that because they're relatively inactive, they don't need a lot of space. And I came to this conclusion last week because that was one of the feedback that I got on the video that I produced or made last week or published. And I started thinking about it, and I said, even if something is inactive, that doesn't really give you ethical grounds to provide it less space, because surely at some point it's going to use the space. Maybe it's not every day, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once every 6 weeks. But do we still just cut it off, say completely, just because you're only going to move 10 times this year, we're going to give you a very small space? So, and we still want to be providing that space. So Nick, as far as you're concerned, you have an 8-foot anaconda in a I would say a large enclosure, especially by hobby standards. And how much activity do you see from her?
Okay, so I mean, I don't have as many animals as you guys, but they're all boas, but I've got 6 animals total right now. And she is hands down, bar none, not even close, the most active of all of them. Maybe neck and neck with my younger Suriname, who's going to be just a monster. But there are times like last week where I didn't see her in the pond for 5 days. It's hard to see. I'll turn the light on a little bit and show you guys some. But there's a cubby above the water next to the waterfall in here. And she's still big enough to slip into it. So usually during the day, she's in there, or she's got a cave with a basking flat roof on the dry side, and she's in there usually during the day. But at nighttime, she's almost like clockwork in that pond every night. Mm-hmm. I don't always find her climbing. I didn't provide a lot of, there's stuff that she can climb to bask and stuff, and she's got a shelf. But there's a rock wall that goes up to the ceiling. I did not expect to find her stretched out across that rock wall. And it's 4.5 feet off the water, off the ground. And I don't catch her up there frequently, maybe once a week. But the wires that are lined there get pulled out when she goes up. And I frequently see that at least 2 or 3 times a week. So she's up there all the time. She's in the water every night. And when she sees me, especially now, she's getting bigger. So she comes right up and she's just like, what are you doing? What do you got? Don't turn around because I'll get you. Mm-hmm. Not really, but she's very active and she's young. She's young. She's not 200 pounds. I get it. But, after talking to Jesus Rivas a little bit, they're very lazy animals at times, especially when they're digesting, stuff like that. They're, 200 pounds. They're not going to move around too much on land, in the water a lot more. But he did say that they were I'm going to mess this word up. Migrator, they migrate.
Migratory.
Thank you. I can never say that word.
No worries.
So especially in the water when they're hunting and breeding and stuff. So I think just giving them at least some type of option to get some type of movement and exercise, any type of stimulation to that muscle, mm-hmm. However, it be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 7 days a week for her. I think it's beneficial to keep that muscle going because they're pure muscle. I mean, and I'm going to, Troy said something to me the other day about his, the big girl he's got not having as much muscle mass from what he thinks is being in a small enclosure. So I think the ability to stimulate within the enclosure is very beneficial in addition to when you take them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So Troy, can you tell us a little bit about the anaconda that you have at the zoo, where it came from, and then you can touch on the activity that you see from her as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't exactly know where she came from because we've had her for, probably close to 15 years, I want to say. But she is an adult female. She is about 16, 17 feet and close to 200 pounds. I think her last weight was 166 pounds. And we actually just relocated her to a new enclosure. And that's that like roughly 15 foot by 10 foot with about a 5 foot deep pool that takes up about 60% of the enclosure. And we're seeing a lot more activity from her now. And I think that is because we are offering her a larger space with a more suitable, swimming location or pool. But I mean, she's a massive snake. But we still see a lot of activity from her on a daily basis. I mean, every day I come in, she's in a different spot within that enclosure. And I mean, just the other day, I recorded a video of her swimming around underneath the water. And I mean, it's amazing when you see a snake that big being that active and using all of those muscles throughout their body to move that massive body. It's absolutely incredible. But I mean, she is a very big snake. She is not friendly by any means.
I was just gonna ask.
Not at all. She will kill you if she got the chance. And so our policy is we always go in with a second keeper whenever we are accessing or servicing that exhibit. Because she will strike at you, and having that much body mass come flying at you definitely is intimidating.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's another really good point too with these huge constrictors is you do want to make sure if you do keep them at home, you have to have somebody there with you, and not only just somebody living with you. You need to be somebody there and say, hey, I'm cleaning cages. If you hear me yell, you got to come running. And it's almost like, I just added a fairly large pond into my rainbow boa enclosure. And there are some similarities between rainbow boas and anacondas. Even like morphologically, they sort of look similar. And she has been blowing my mind. Like after about a week or two of her being in there, I fed her. And the first thing she did after I fed her, she went in the water. And I know anacondas will sometimes do that as well. And that really and shocked me because she's had large water dishes in the past, but this is a very deep pond for her to go into. And now she's been in shed and she's literally been in the water for 1 week straight. And I'm like concerned, like I'm poking her with sticks, like, are you dead? Like, but it's just what she's doing. And so what that tells me is this boa would have done that for the last 5 years and didn't have the opportunity, which is kind of sad. And that's so now I could never not have that. So, so someone for yourself, Nick, where you have climbing opportunities and you have a big pond, you could never downsize to a small rack type thing with a dog water bowl.
Yeah, no, I mean, and when COVID came, I lost a really, really good job. Like I've been there for 6 years. Financially, it gave me freedoms that I'd never had in my life. And when COVID came, that went away. And it was the first thing was, well, I could sell my house and profit 70,000 right now, and then just regroup in a couple of years. But then I'm like, well, what do I do with the snakes? I'm not going to be able to bring. Let's face it, I'm not going to be able to bring them with me somewhere. Maybe one, but. So, when we talk about selfish, let's go the opposite way. It was, if I had to get rid of her right now, I would immediately sell her with the cage at a ridiculously low price. So I know that at minimum, she's going to get that. Mm-hmm. And like, I'll be honest, I got her, she was about a year old, a little bit older than a year. And then she was about about 4.5 feet long. And I had her in a 4x2x2. And I'm not going to say she wasn't active at all, but I gave her opportunities to, change elevations, and I put a big water basin in the middle. So she would soak in the water for, whenever she was digesting or whatever, but she was fairly inactive, at least from what I saw. I mean, and to go from a 4x2x2, she was 6'3" when I switched her, to go from a 4x2x2 to an 11x6x4, let's say, 11x6x4. I mean, that's like, moving out of a studio apartment and going to the Playboy Mansion. And it's massive. And the just overwhelming activity levels from her immediately. I mean, and at first I thought it was, well, she's getting into a new enclosure. She's just getting settled in, but it kept going and going and going. And people said, well, she'll get bigger, but it kept going. And she, I could never, ever put her into something smaller than this, especially as she gets bigger.
Yeah. Troy, do you think it's fair to say that, and this might be way too general of a statement, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the smaller the enclosure, the less active the animal's going to be?
Oh, yeah, of course, 100%. I mean, when we ideally, for every reptile that I own, every reptile that I care for, I would love to offer an enclosure that is the size of the animal's natural home range, and so that might mean for a ball python, I've got an enclosure that's like 100 yards, that's very unrealistic. But if I offer that animal an enclosure the size of its home range, it's going to use majority of that enclosure. It's going to venture out. It's going to find resources. It's going to find food. It's going to thermoregulate throughout that entire environment. And then it might retreat back to its, back to its home. But it's going to utilize it. But if I restrict that animal and don't offer that, of course, the animal is going to sit there and be less active because it doesn't have that opportunity to do so. And that's been something I've really been pushing towards, even at the zoo, even in these zoo setups, is the idea of environmental enrichment. How do I encourage activity in an already spacious enclosure? How do I get these animals to be, quote unquote, more engaging for the general public? Because, some reptiles do, they're the masters at conserving energy. Some reptiles will just sit there for a large portion of the day. And to the general public coming to the zoo, that can be quite boring, So what can I do to enrich these animals through their environment, to encourage a natural activity cycle that you would see in the wild, where these animals are venturing from tree to tree or moving, up and down a rock as the heat of the day comes up or whatnot. Because that's definitely something we don't offer as much in a capped environment. I mean, you think about 90% of our enclosures just with lighting alone, 7 a.m., the sun comes up, 7 p.m., sun's off,
Not quite natural.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I think you've actually done some work in situ in, I think you were saying Peru, where you're actually working with some wild anacondas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And what you learned from that experience?
Sure. It wasn't necessarily, working with wildlife. I went out there more on a humanitarian trip project, I guess. And I was going into the villages within Iquitos, Peru, and just kind of educating I was working with the kids out there and talking about the importance on basic hygiene, and washing your hands and not using the Amazon River for everything, which, is very simple stuff to us, but to them, it's their livelihood. That's how they function. But every time we went to a new village, every single village out there is built around a soccer field. Which is amazing because I'm a huge soccer fan. And sorry, I'm rambling here. I'll finish. No,
go for it. That's why we're here.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so every day we went into a new village, we'd of course start with a soccer game, and we were in the middle of a soccer game, and one of the villagers just screams anaconda, and I immediately just dropped what I was doing, passed the ball off to someone, and I sprinted to where I heard that scream. And sure enough, it was this wild 8-foot anaconda that was just sitting in this little pool that was right next to this village where this woman was washing her clothes. And so, naturally, the herpetologist that I am, or the herper that I am, had to grab that anaconda, get hands on it, mess with it a little bit, which probably not the best thing, but it was just amazing to see that animal in the wild, see, what a wild body condition looks like, wild activity. And I'll tell you right now, that snake was a total dirtbag. I picked that snake up and I was like, this is amazing, as it's like coiling around my neck. And I had to have a villager come pry this snake off of me, because I was, it's an 8-foot snake. It was a big snake. But yeah, I mean, it was just an amazing experience to be able to see one of them in the wild.
That's amazing. I want to get back to talking about a little bit about the wild, because there's so many myths and legends with anacondas, but we'll get back to that a little bit later. So Nick, one of the things that I hear a lot from big snake keepers, and I think there is some merit to this as long as you are actually consistently doing this. Some people see the enclosure as more of their home base, and then the rest, maybe the larger room, as their enclosure. So maybe I come home and I open the door and let the snake come out and get some exercise and move around. Do you subscribe to that at all? Do you think that is a valid way to keep if it's something that you're doing consistently?
I think if you did it enough, if you offered enough options, I mean, this is a little a bit above my pay grade when it comes to the exact details of how often they need to come out. But I think I've seen something like one thing that I do is I want her just, I mean, this is more for me, but I want her to get some sunshine exercise too, you know, and maybe I'm her trainer or whatever, but I'll take her out back, and I have a big kiddie pool that I'll fill up during the summertime. And if I, you know, put it up around, you know, 10 or 11 o'clock, usually by 1 or so, it's right around that 84 degrees, you know, that ballpark. And I'll let her swim. I'll throw some of the fake plants that I have extra in there and just let her soak in the sunshine and swim around, and with, you know, even more, I mean, arguably more room to stretch and swim. And is that something that needs to be done? Probably not. But I think that no matter how much you take them out, especially when they're bigger, because as they get bigger, it's a process, you know, as Troy said, you know, I think Troy said, you know, you have to have somebody there, you know, like right now she's at that size where I'm not letting her above my shoulders anymore. Sometimes she doesn't like that, but she's overly docile. So I don't have too much concern holding her. But now there's that thought in my head that, you can reach me from anywhere you are now, where back in the day, I would dodge her. So it's hard for me to see people that would be able to take them out enough to really substitute for that. But I think there's a happy medium. If you can give them just a little more room, or, you know, a few extra feet to be able to have some type of enrichment in the enclosure, you don't have to give them that exercise as much. If you want to do it, maybe it's a substitution, or at least it's better than not doing it. But I think just them having the ability to do what they want when they want within reason is a better substitution, or a better way to go than just having to take them out every day.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, realistically, who's taking a 20-foot reticulated python out of their cage every third day or something like that? Like, you're right. It's a huge amount of work.
Probably Troy.
Troy might.
Probably not.
Well, there is that, you know, that image when you walk into a reptile expo and you go to the table with, you know, 40 reticulated python babies, and there's something that it feels wrong to me for that. Like, yes, like we're saying, there's certainly people who are absolutely capable of caring for a full-grown reticulated python. I'm not going to take that away from a keeper who's done the work and is planning on doing this, but to literally have someone who's never owned a reptile capable of walking into a reptile show and spending $200 on a snake that has the potential of being a 15, 16, 17-foot snake seems ridiculous. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go
I'll
for
tell
it.
you, one of the worst things for the hobby are the impulse buys. I'll
Yes.
tell you right now, you know, when people walk into a reptile shop, walk into a hobby and say, oh man, that's a reticulated python. That's one of the longest snakes in the world, if not the longest snake in the world. Oh man, that is so cool. $100, game on, you know?
Yep.
No idea how to care for it. No idea how big that snake is actually going to get and what that entails. And then, you know, a year later when it's 4 or 5 feet, oh, I've got this reticulated python that I can't care for anymore. Let me either release it out in my backyard or give it to my buddy or post it for sale.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, what happens to those little snakes? Like, where do they end up? There's for sure
Gosh.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Everglades.
I've got some buddies that work at a local reptile shop by the house that I got all my feeders from. And it would honestly break your heart how many animals come in that are malnourished, mistreated, or just dropped off at the doorstep that they're like, I don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah.
So this is my little plug right now is anyone listening to this podcast that is thinking about buying a reptile, do all of your research.
Yeah.
Anything you can, all of your research, do as much as you can before buying an animal, because it is the worst thing for this hobby when you do not know how to care for your animal that you just bought.
Exactly.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
But yeah, so that's something I've had that discussion with people recently. Is, you know, people are a little upset that the anacondas in the U.S. You know, you can only get them from breeders now, which I think that's a good thing because the imports are kind of hit or miss.
Yeah,
but they went, you know, they at one point were 250, then they were 300, then they were 500. Well, now the breeders have the monopoly on them, so they can charge whatever. I mean, I could probably turn around and sell this girl for a couple thousand, maybe, you know, but people are like, oh, I hate that it's that much money. And it's like, yeah, but, and listen, there's going to be people who can impulse buy 50,000 if they really wanted to, but when you start talking about $150, $200, $300, and $1,500, that's at least more. And maybe if there's maybe a couple steps added. I know people don't like regulations, and listen, I didn't have any regulations with her, whatever, but I would have I had to get a conditional species permit, but so I did have regular, but at first I didn't. So, I think that not making them so available that someone can just go buy a snake that gets 200 pounds plus, and all across the industry, I see so many people that are just getting these animals and have no clue. And I'm mostly zoned in on boas, but even myself, who kept them for a couple of years, who volunteered and worked at a zoo and a reptile rescue, in the last 2 years, I've learned probably 98% of everything that I know about snakes in that time. And, a lot of people look at me and say, oh, you've only been doing it for this long or that long. Listen, I have spent many a sleepless night sitting up and reading and researching and speaking to guys like Troy. I mean, I've reached out, and I'm not saying this to boost myself, but reaching out to people like Jesus Rivas. The dude wrote a freaking book that people are buying on anacondas. Those are the people that I want to get advice from.
Is that it right there?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's one of them.
But anyway, sorry.
No, I mean, it's so true. And there are so many amazing species that you can keep in captivity. There are it's almost an endless list. And the large constrictors should really be on the peripheries. It should be just the very specialized keeper. And it does concern me that they are nearly an industry staple at this point. And I'm just imagine when the first anaconda morph pops up, if there aren't already.
Gosh.
How horrible is that going to be?
Don't even say that. I'm gonna knock on wood right now.
Yeah, let's all knock on wood.
Oh gosh.
Because it just like I said, I don't want to take it away from anybody keeping them, but they don't need to be the go-to snake for the average person, because it's just more. So is there, as the three of us talking here, these don't have to be official rules, but as far as the enclosure size should go, should the recommendation be the length of the snake at least?
That's what I always try to strive for, to allow that animal to completely stretch out. So if it's a 15-foot snake, a 15-foot enclosure. Now, is it realistic that your snake is going to be straight as a rod within that enclosure? No, it's not. But again, going back to the animal's privileges, the animal should have the capability to do that, in my opinion. So I think the animal should be at least be able to stretch completely out. And, as far as the width goes, that one's always kind of weird. I always try to strive for a deeper enclosure to allow just more surface area within the enclosure to allow the animal to move around. If you go from 24 inches wide to 30 inches, offers so much more available space just within 6 inches of depth, and that might be overhanging your shelving unit slightly, but you have no idea what that 6 inches is doing for that animal in available space. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Do you have anything to say on that one, Nick?
Yeah, I think anacondas. I was just talking about this with a guy, Jason, a couple days ago, who he's really getting into breeding, and he's on board with, I'd say, probably 70%. He's probably watching this by the time this is posted, but no, definitely not 70%. But he's on board with a lot of the stuff I say. But I think that with anacondas, it's tough because while you want to provide a nice aquatic area, if you can, for a reticulated python and a Burmese, I mean, I listen, they're not my specialty, but I have talked to a woman, a Thai woman. She does a lot of studies with reticulated. She has reticulated, she works at zoos with reticulated. So I do ask a lot because I get questions a lot and I don't know how to answer a lot of them. So she's my go-to. So I think with reticulated pythons and Burmese, they're going to spend time in the water if you give it to them. I don't think people realize how aquatic they can be. But I think if you have, let's say this, an 11 by 6 by 6, I could give them, a third of the water area and still give them enough space to fully submerge, move around a little bit. And they still have access to that land area. Plus, you might have more climbing out of them, so you have that opportunity too. With anacondas, I think it's really important to give them that water. I mean, I know maybe this isn't a direct analogous situation, but would you give a red ear slider a gopher tortoise enclosure? Spends all its time or most of its time near the water, in the water. It may not be directly analogous, but it's similar. And with that, you're going to have a reduced land area. And with that, if you want to give them a decent amount of land, you might need that few extra feet. Whereas this enclosure might be sufficient for a snake 5 or 6 feet bigger than her because it doesn't have quite that aquatic area. So I try to put wood over the pond. So, she does stretch out. I mean, I've seen her stretch not all the way across because she's not that big yet, but I have seen her stretch across the wood. I've seen her stretch out across the top of the enclosure. As I said, I've seen her stretch out right here in front of the glass where I'll walk up and, so yeah, I mean, I definitely think that in any case, I mean, there's really not an argument against giving them more space besides I can't afford it, I don't want to, or these people say it's okay that it's really hold any water.
Well, I think that's the main thing is when you do look at it, if you want to provide what we would classify the three of us as an adequate space, it is a ridiculously large enclosure. Like there's just no way around that. If you have an 18-foot snake, it's going to be a massive enclosure. And if you have a room dedicated to that, that's great. But how many people actually do that? They sell reticulated python drawer type things, right? These are 10-foot drawers that are 2 feet high or whatever they are, and you put your paper substrate and that's it. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not going to see a single natural behavior out of that animal.
No.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Maybe they'll be fine in there. They don't have the senses, they don't have the brain levels that we have as far as happiness. There's studies on that, and I'm definitely not the person to tell you about that. There was a guy in your comment video, it might have been a person who was just, you're what's wrong with the business. I don't agree. I think that person that is commenting is what's wrong, because certain keepers that are prevalent on YouTube whose, names rhyme with Ryan and their last name may start with B, while he did provide a nice anaconda enclosure, a lot of his cages are just complete. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to give you more work because I have a potty mouth, but they're not good. Some of them are okay, and you know what? Whatever. But between people like that, just promoting, like just blatant, not even just a little overfeed, blatant, ridiculous power feeding, tiny, small as you can enclosures because they're not just going to drop dead because of it. Maybe she's not getting joy out of this, but there are a lot of benefits to this. Mm-hmm. And again, we're so far away on this spectrum. I don't claim that people need this, at least not for one that small. Troy, actually, I wanted to bring this up. We talked about this privately. Okay. She's 8 feet. This is an 11, 6, 6'4", let's say. How big of an anaconda realistically do you think should be kept in this with roughly 60% of it being water?
With 60% of it, I mean, I think given the natural history of anacondas and them being semi-aquatic, I think you could house, maybe an 11-foot, 12-foot anaconda in that enclosure. You probably could go larger than that, because of what we know about their natural history. Now, the larger you go, again, is going to be limiting that anaconda's privileges to move throughout that enclosure. So there's no true science, at least not that we have right now, or not from what I can find through publications, on what is an adequate size enclosure for any animal, right? But like I said before, we should just be allowing these animals to display every single possible natural behavior that they can. Mm-hmm. And while trying to replicate a piece of nature as much as possible, because that is the perfect environment for that animal. That is the perfect way to keep an animal in a captive situation. And so, like I said before, I'm just going to be reiterating multiple times, when we make sacrifices or make justifications, we are lessening that animal's welfare.
Yeah.
So and kind of going back on what you guys were talking about, one of my biggest things right now, because you get a lot of people a lot of pushback, when you come to with these new advances in reptile husbandry and what we've been learning so far, like with lighting and heating and enrichment and enclosure size and whatever it is. Look, we've kept these animals alive for generations. We've been keeping reptiles in a captive setting for generations. We're keeping them alive, but we're learning now that these animals are surviving and not thriving, and so our ultimate goal is we should be doing everything we can to allow these animals to thrive in a captive setting, not just survive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's when we have a group of animals that have spent, 200 million years or whatever it is on Earth, it should be no surprise to us that they can suffer through some serious, horrible conditions. This is just how they made it this far. So the fact that their hearts are still beating is not a good indication if we're doing the right job. And, a point I always try to make is these animals are a result of the environment they evolved in. So whatever environmental niche created that animal is what they're designed and genetically designed to tick in. Just like my rainbow boa, these are animals that probably have a fairly aquatic natural behavior, and I didn't have to teach her how to use the pond. I gave her a pond and she did it. She's not been exposed to this pond. It's been 5 years I've had her, I've never given her this, and she did it right away. It's because those cues are built into them. And so the quote that guides everything I do with my care is, the better your husbandry, the more your animals will reward you with their natural behavior. And I really hope everybody can take that quote and apply it to their husbandry, because they do reward you. Every time you offer something new, you get this new exciting behavior, and it's amazing. And they're not dogs. You don't have to teach them. They just do it. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, you're totally right. You're totally right. You should make that. You should make T-shirts out of that.
Bumper stickers.
Oh heck yeah, man! We should be screaming that, because it's so true. I mean, I just got some Gastropholis persina at home. Some keeled bellied. Oh gosh, green keeled bellied lizards. Sorry,
the guys with the crazy tongues.
Yeah. But and I've been talking with Sam and about lighting and providing them a kind of 24-hour lighting spectrum or spectrum change over a 24-hour period. And it's really interesting because I've been observing them displaying these basking behaviors, different basking behaviors underneath LEDs. Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's like, what the heck? Why are they basking underneath an LED? This offers them no benefit, but because this LED potentially is a more natural light spectrum, instinct is telling them, this is the perfect lighting. This is where perfect lighting. This is where everything should be coming from. This is where my heat, my UV, everything should be coming from. And it just makes you think like, oh man, like what can I do better to get this throughout the whole enclosure and into and it's just so incredible when you offer this little tiny thing as far as like a little LED and these animals display a different behavior, just like your pool of water. And you're like, oh, this is awesome. I got to do something more.
I think that experience would happen as well if you had a reticulated python that didn't have a climbing space, and then one day, like Brian Barczyk, he did exactly that. He had these things in small cages. He put it into an enclosure that it could climb, and the very first thing it did is climb up into the tree, and his jaw hit the floor. And it's exciting. It's fun to watch them climb. Mm-hmm.
So much fun.
Yeah.
That was one of the people. I wish I could remember her name because she's. As much as I bothered Troy, I've probably bothered her more, even though she doesn't keep the same animals I keep. She was saying that, the reticulated pythons around her, they'll use anything and everything. They'll find them up in the treetops. She suggests, I don't recall the exact numbers, but she gives 7 feet of height. And, there's when I was getting ready to set this up, I went to a couple different zoos that I called ahead, made sure they had anacondas. The aquarium didn't have anacondas, but they had Burmese pythons. So, I wanted to go over there anyway. So I went. But, these ledges for the Burmese pythons and for the reticulated at the zoo, the ledges are 6 to 7 feet off the ground. One of the Burmese python, this is a huge cage, so there's a couple in there, but one of them was up on the shelf, which is, there's like a tree that attached to it, just chilling up there. 8 feet off the ground, and the other one is in the pond. And again, there's restrictions. I understand. But when you have a snake that is 200 pounds, again, just massive. I mean, they're this big around, this high, in a cage that's a couple feet tall. And, they're the top anaconda keepers. I'm not going to name names because I have respect in some regards to some of them. But, I mean, we're looking at like 15, 16-foot anacondas in an 8x3 by 1 by 2, whatever it is. And it's not just the size. It's the fact that, when they're wrapped up, they're covering, because of their girth, they're covering 75% of the cage. There's no height, which, I mean, their bodies take up more than half the cage in height. And then again, the little water bowl there. And I don't think that there's an argument besides we can. I'm going to say this again. I don't think that there's an argument besides, yes, we can do this, that goes against giving them at least some enrichment, some size. Doesn't have to be this. Listen, if I saw a 16-foot anaconda, like Troy's at the zoo, if not at the zoo, but if I saw someone with that snake in this cage, that's not ideal for me, but I wouldn't go, and towards them. That's something. You're giving it some room to swim. You're giving it some room to stretch and utilize those muscles and stay healthy. And with the very, very big problem of overfeeding, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I think that's really, really important.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because one of the comment that you were talking about, Nick, on the video was an interesting one. A piece of, we'll call it constructive feedback that I got was, you shouldn't make videos suggesting that we should use bigger cages because it's fuel for the animal rights groups. And I thought, hey, actually, this isn't fuel for the animal rights groups. What's fuel for the animal rights group is when you type in reticulated python on YouTube, you find reticulated pythons being kept in drawers or very small, plain, unenriched enclosures. That is fuel. The fact that I'm talking about, hey, maybe we should rethink the way we keep some of these larger animals is actually a good thing. That the animal rights people should look at that and go, hey, maybe they're considering to change. So anyway, very interesting topic. So I think we should shift gears to the feeding because we kind of started getting into it there. And this is a kind of a nightmare topic as well, as far as...
God. Oh, I can't wait for this.
So as far as I will use Brian as an example here because I've mentioned Brian on the podcast before. I've talked to him on the phone, and like as I've always said, he was nice to me on the phone. He's a nice person as far as I'm concerned, considering the times I've spoke with him. Now that his channel is, and I've said before on the podcast, now that his channel is more focused in the zoo, I think that's a positive rather than being focused in the breeding room. Check. The blatant public power feeding, especially of his anaconda, is something that needs to be talked about and also is egregious in some ways. So I did a little bit of studying before this to get some good numbers. So he's had his large anaconda for about 14 months. And in that time, on the vlog, he's fed it 19 times.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So that doesn't include what he fed it off the blog.
You said 14 months?
14 months. So 19 times he said his words where he feeds it 7 to 10 days and then at least one, those are small meals, and then at least one large meal a month, and he gives it 2 to 2.5 weeks off after that. So in September last year, it weighed 35 pounds. And last week, it weighed in at 87 pounds.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's a 240%
Oh, my
increase.
gosh. Oh, my gosh.
So I don't want to actually dwell on that.
Sure.
I want to give the listeners some context to make them understand. And now let's talk about healthy feeding to hopefully dodge. So that is not good. That is way too much, and it's public, and it's there. And there's been some massive meals like 20-pound pigs, huge turkey, things like that. And this is a death sentence for that animal. So maybe, Troy, you could touch on how to healthily feed a large constrictor.
Oh, for sure. So I was actually trying to do a bunch of research before this podcast as well. And I found this paper, and it's on my work computer, and I'll try to get it to you. But it talks about metabolic rates of boids. And I was trying to take those metabolic rates and actually find the exact caloric intake that these animals should have based on their metabolic rates to develop the perfect feeding regime based on caloric intake.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to be able to formulate all these calculations. But these snakes are massive snakes, and when you have a snake like that, with a body size like that, they do have a large or a fast metabolism, right? Or I shouldn't say a fast metabolism, but a healthy metabolism. And a lot of energy goes into this metabolism. And when you feed them these large food items, they are expending a ton of resources in this to get this metabolism working and going. And yeah, gosh. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought because I'm just so frustrated.
I think people don't realize how little it is hard, because as a human, as a warm-blooded creature, we're hungry all the time. Our the energy that we consume is really dedicated to keeping our body temperature at that 98 degrees, and it does take a lot of energy to do that. So when you move something into a cold-blooded species, you remove the need for that, which is it's going to save us a lot of need for calories. So it is hard for humans, I think, to sometimes realize how little these animals need to eat. But I've heard at least two fairly large boa breeders, one Vin Russo and another one Jeff Ronnie, I think his name is, and I actually saw this on Barczyk's blog, and they've both talked about slowly feeding boas, slow. And Vin especially has talked about fasting his boas over the winter, and this is something that I do as well, and we'll definitely talk about. But one of the things that Jeff said that I heard him say on Brian's vlog was that if you feed them too quickly, it's their organs that start to overdevelop and grow quicker than their bodies, and this is where we run into issues. And I always bring up this story on the podcast I saw. It was a Facebook post of someone that had a berm. It was like a 20-foot, maybe an 18-foot berm. And these people really thought they were doing a great job caring for it. The regular kind of following maybe once a month type feed. And it died at around 20, maybe it was even a little bit younger. So they did a post-mortem on it, and it died of a heart attack. And when they cut it open, it was just full of fat bodies. And they were really shocked. And the reason they posted this on Facebook was to say, hey, guys, I was feeding this slowly. I thought I was feeding it slowly, and it essentially died of obesity.
Yeah.
So we have to be very, you can jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start off by saying we feed our anaconda at the zoo 6 times a year.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Six times.
Oh, you starving underfeeder.
I know, right? But in my opinion, this anaconda is still overconditioned. Still what I would like to see. It is still obese in my opinion, not in a healthy body condition. But feeding, and people would say, oh man, you're feeding it 6 times a year. How does this animal still obese? But when we're feeding such large food items and such infrequent food items, that animal's metabolism is fluctuating so much that we're not potentially giving it the opportunity to burn off all of those calories that it took in, or all of those fat reserves during that time. Mm-hmm. And so these anacondas in the wild, they might be eating more frequent small food items, or they're eating one giant food item within a year. But then they go through these, and we'll get more into fasting, but I'm going to bring it up. They go into these, periods of fasting where there's less food availability. And that is when they are burning off all these fat stores. There was actually a study that I looked into, and snakes, when fasted, actually burn off fat first, rather than going into proteins and things like that. And so with large snakes, I think fasting is such an important thing, especially in a captive situation when we're not offering them, the activity levels, the potential temperature gradients, or heat sources that allows them to properly metabolize these food items, to properly burn off these fat stores, and then we're just feeding them based on what we think is right, based on off our anthropomorphic thoughts, saying my snake is moving, it must be hungry. When this snake might be going into a state of increased activity because it's foraging for food, because this snake out in the wild might happen upon food once a month, but it doesn't have this steady resource of food that it does in a captive situation. So instinct is telling it needs to go out and find food, because that's what they do in the wild, but they might not find a food source for months, for a year.
And they had to work for it. They had to work for the failure, which is really important.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're totally right. And so that's where, and at the zoo, we feed our anaconda, like I mentioned, 6 times a year, but we only feed it in the summer.
What are you feeding it, by the way? Is it rabbits or?
Rabbits. Yeah. 5 to 10 pound rabbits each feeding.
Okay.
Which that's another thing. If you look at, the studies that have been done with anacondas and what they eat in the wild, they have an amazing, varied diet. They're eating other reptiles, they're eating turtles, they're eating lizards, they're eating the large capybaras, but more frequent food items found in anacondas are birds, fish, turtles, not mammals, which is kind of interesting. Which we talk about the caloric makeup of different types of animals, in a captive situation, when we're feeding these captive bred small mammals that have been fed these fatty diets and are a lot fattier food items than what would be found in the wild. We're again setting those animals up for to be already overconditioned just by feeding them, cheeseburgers their entire life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one thing I've heard Vin Russo say is that, and it sounds counterintuitive, I hear him say it all the time, is that boas grow when you fast them. And I always thought, well, that's so weird, but it's totally because they aren't really fasting. Well, they are fasting from eating meals, but they're burning through fat. And when they're burning through fat, it is as if they are eating, and they can put that into muscle development and growth.
That's exactly right. There was a study done with I'm going to have to send it to you, but it was about fasting snakes. And they found, the longest they fasted them for was 168 days. But during that 168 days, the snakes still grew in length by 4%, which is amazing. They're still growing in length, even though they have no food intake, which just shows that, potentially size does matter in the wild, where they need to grow because of competition of resources, competition of mating and whatnot. But it's amazing that they're able to do that without a food source.
Yeah,
for
it is incredible.
That period of time. Yeah.
So Nick, can you tell us a little bit how you're feeding your anaconda?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying I was not doing this. This was something that I heard people, I was one of those people that posted that care sheet, medium rat every 3 weeks, large rat every 4 weeks, small rat every 2, whatever. And it wasn't necessarily bad, but I started off feeding my BI, my boa imperata. I started feeding her weekly because she was very young, very small. I don't even promote that anymore. I see people saying, I feed them every week. I don't see a need to feed, at least with boas, every week. She's the only boa that I have that has been overweight. As soon as I fasted her, she has no longer been overweight. So the anaconda, I will admit, when I first got her, I was going a little overboard because I was getting conflicting information. And like when I worked at the reptile, there was a big 15-foot female that was, I don't remember how much she weighed, 130 pounds, whatever. But mostly I think she was getting rabbits, chickens. I was pretty much cleanup crew there. I got to work with her quite a bit, but I didn't pick the brain of people enough when I was there. So when I started feeding her, it was, they're like, medium rat every week, so I was feeding a little bit too much. She grew a lot. She did. But now I've leveled off since just the first couple months having her. So last year was like an introduction for me and for my animals into food cycling and fasting. And with her, because she was larger, even though she's not older yet, I kind of went with what I do with the older animals to a degree. So with her and my older Suriname, I did basically an 8-week fast. And it was just, again, kind of like an introduction. She was getting medium rats every like 3 weeks. No, I'm sorry. It was 10 weeks. I apologize. 10 weeks. So I took her off for 10 weeks. She kept growing. Oh, did she keep growing? But it keeps their bodies just gorgeous and muscular. And that growth, when they first come off the food, she's only eating every 3 to 4 weeks. So you're not going to see that really oomph of the fasting until it's a little bit longer. But, right around the six week mark, I'd say she really started just every time I saw her, I was like, well, how big you getting, girl? You know, and it really extended into when she started eating again. Because, you know, I mean, I can't listen, I'm not an internal snake specialist, so I don't know the exact details, but it seemed like it took a little while to take because the body has to recognize that it hasn't had food in a while. That's what I would put it to. But it extended into once I started feeding her again, she sprout out. And I know that if I give her a jumbo rat every 7 days, she's going to be bigger than 8 feet. Mm-hmm. But she's also going to be probably twice as heavy. And I'm probably going to take 10 or 20 years off her life, you know, and if she does happen to live to be that older age, that's kind of, in my opinion, that's kind of like pointing to a, you know, an 85, 90-year-old person and say, well, that person smoked cigarettes and ate McDonald's every day of their life. So that's what everyone should do. Mm-hmm. So I'm sacrificing maybe, I would say, a year of her getting that extra size. But what are the benefits of keeping her on that long? So this year she was probably about 6'3" or so at the beginning of this year. She's probably around 8 feet now. So she's grown about 2 feet, give or take. And keep in mind, she's only 3 years old. 8 feet, I don't think is bad. Troy, you can answer that in a second. But so she was getting a large rat at 6 feet, smaller end, basically the girth of the snake with a slight lump every 4 weeks. So I did that from March until about August. Once August hits, right around then, I increase it a little bit, right around 3 weeks. And then once the middle of November hits, I might do a bigger meal, like a slight, not dangerously big, but like I did a jumbo rat for the first time. Now, keep in mind, I will not be feeding her jumbo rats when she switches next year. I'm going to rabbits of equal weight as a jumbo. But I'll probably do like a jumbo as a treat once a year, maybe like a chicken, something like that to mix it up a little bit. But so from middle of November until March, he will not be eating. The temperatures come down a little bit. And last year, I can't say for this year because we're only a little bit way through, but last year I saw no increased defensive behavior. I saw nothing different from her. You know, sometimes I see the snakes hunting, but they do that when they've just eaten them like 2 days ago. So, but yeah, I mean, it's worked great. She's a good size. I mean, she's about 15 pounds, which, you know, people are like, oh, an 8-foot anaconda is 15 pounds. Well, you know, she'll probably end up being about 100. So, but she's pure muscle. She's healthy. I've gotten nothing but compliments from, you know, Troy and from Jesus. And again, I'm not patting myself. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm not sitting here trying to be smug, but that is the best piece of info that I think I've picked up. And I thank people like Troy. God, yes, Troy, how many messages I sent him just going, well, what if I do this? What if I do this? How's this? And now people are doing it to me. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't explain food cycling and fasting. And maybe there's things that can be tweaked, because if I went through all the snakes and how they do it, even the two red tails that are the exact same age, similar lengths, one of them gets a small rat every 16 to 19 days. One of them gets it every 14 days and grows less. So, you know, it's really based off of the animal, the results I see, the body. But we're talking about an 8-foot snake eating a large rat once a month and then not eating for the winter time. And again, this is only the second year I'm doing it. So I'll be able to report better next year. But this is just the info that I've gotten. And one more thing, I'm sorry, I've been talking, but when I spoke to Jesus, and I'm not trying to name drop here, pick it up, but he's helped me a lot too. But he's more with like wild snakes, where Troy has the experience with the captive ones. But when I asked him, like, listen, how often are these snakes eating in the wild? And of course it varies, but he says the adult anacondas in the wild 2 to 3 times a year. Now, maybe they're eating a capybara that borderline splits their guts out. So we don't do that. We know that we need to keep it smaller so we can adjust their feedings based on the size. But when we're talking about these snakes in the wild that are approaching 17, 18, maybe 20, depending on who you talk to, definitely not 28 feet like all the sites say, but when they're approaching that 17, 18 foot range, 200 pounds, 150, whatever they are, they're very muscular, they're very healthy. And on average, we're hearing that they're only eating a couple meals a year. Now you adjust for proper size and health, and maybe it's 4 or 5, 6, but I think it's just really beneficial to do the food cycling, and it's the best decision I've made.
Yeah, and you know, we are talking about boas as well, so we can't just say do this with your, you know, whatever corn snake, and if you're not going to brumate them or whatever. And so I'm not super familiar with other species, but with the boas for sure, I do thin out my meals in the winter for my carpet python, but definitely my boas, and I have a very similar experience that you're saying, Nick. Usually feed every 4 to 5 weeks during the summer. I'll bump it up in the hot month, and in August I might do 2 in a row at 2 weeks, and then I'll ease it off, and then December, January, most of February, no food. The annoying thing about snakes is when you overfeed them, they don't necessarily get fat first. They just get long. And they probably are getting fat, but we don't really see it. And it is annoying that you can take a snake. And that's exactly why you have, you know, these power feeders on the internet doing it, because they want a big snake. And it just sucks that they're doing that. They're really sacrificing the snake's life.
I mean, it can be quite difficult to assess body condition in snakes, you know, because they're just this slender-bodied figure. You know, it can be quite challenging, but, you know, if you were to take that snake that you fed once a week, and you might not consider it obese, and actually do a necropsy on it, you're going to find a ton of fat stores within that animal. And that's why I always say, you know, and not to contradict what Nick has said or anything, but, you know, that's why I don't have a strict feeding regime for my animals. I don't go out and get, you know, once a week, once every 4 weeks. I feed my animals based on body condition. You know, if my animal is maintaining what I consider a healthy weight, I'm going to keep up a feeding regime to keep up that healthy weight.
I should say
so I might feed my animal. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was like, I do make adjustments. I should have said that. I make adjustments based on their body. So, again, like my younger Suriname, she gets a small rat she's 54 inches at 2 years old. And she gets a small rat every 16 to 19 days, roughly. Whereas the Guyana, who's also 2 years old, 3 days older, very similar size, about 4 inches shorter, but she gets it every 2 weeks. So if I see that they're responding very well to here, then I'll keep it here or maybe bump it back. If I don't see that they're growing too quickly, they're getting chunky, adjustments are made. So it's a rough outline within like 3 or 4 days, maybe a week with the older ones. So yeah, adjustments should definitely be made. I'm sorry I didn't say
sure. No. But yeah, and I just think, you know, I'm going to say that I believe a lean snake is a healthy snake. You know, it's going to be a more active snake. It's going to be a more physically fit snake, reproductively healthy snake. You know, and so yeah, when you get these snakes that are slightly obese or even morbidly obese, you know, you're doing so much of a detriment to them, you know.
And it's actually very difficult to get them to lose the weight.
Oh,
that's
very
the
difficult.
thing is, it's not like a person you throw them on the treadmill and give them a good diet, and hopefully over like 6 or 7 weeks you'll start seeing a difference. But with snakes, they really hold. I mean, all reptiles, they hold on to it, right? It's just an unnatural thing to be happening to them. They're not really primed to be having fat bodies like that in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
I was told. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, yeah, and that's when you tell someone when they bring over their bearded dragon, you're like, gosh, that bearded dragon's super fat. You need to feed it less, and people are like, what? Like, no. I can't feed it less. Yeah, you know, you need to starve that animal for a month to get it back down to its fighting weight, and you're like, what the heck are you talking about?
Metabolically, they're amazing animals. They can do it.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I think that I don't even remember what I was going to say now. Oh God! I'm sorry. I remember. Okay. Listen, I love sitting here listening to Troy. I can listen to Troy talk all day, and it's not just soothing. But no, so I think that the number. I'm not even going to say the number. I'm gonna ask Troy to say it, because you are not the only person, Troy, to say this number. When you said it, and I heard it somewhere else, I was kind of like, okay, it seems a bit much. But the more people I talk to that are legit, what I consider legitimate experts, and you don't have to be a herpetologist wherever to be an expert. It's not that. But I think that a lot of the breeding people may have a vested interest with things that are maybe not as good as could be. But again, there's like differences with breeding that I would say, okay, in that situation, I see that. But what's the number, the percentage you gave me roughly of, I'm not going to say just constrictors, but let's just for this, like, what's the number that that is overweight?
Yeah. I mean, I can confidently say that 90% of reptiles in a captive setting are obese.
I've heard that. I've heard that from I've probably seven different people with, from people who are in the wild, people who are zoologists. I mean, that's a number that I could not believe. And then I heard it again and again and again. And if I can quote Scream for a minute, because I have to do it once, you can only hear that Richard Gere gerbil story so many times before you just have to believe it.
Well, I mean, the one thing I'll quickly say is with that, I mean, the listeners might listen to that and go, "What? That's just not possible that 90% of the reptiles in captivity are overweight." But the people listening to this show are typically keepers that are looking to advance their care. They're very dialed into husbandry and whatnot. But there are millions of people who own reptiles in the United States, and those people do not interact with this show or advancing husbandry and whatnot. Those are the people that have their sort of scaly babies. I can barely even say it without punching myself in the face.
Cringing.
But
I still get people that reach out to me probably on a monthly basis that have no idea what UVB is for their bearded dragon.
Exactly.
And I'm like, you've had this bearded dragon for how long? And,
so it's no surprise that there could be that many that are overweight. Yeah,
and I'm not trying to discourage people from not keeping reptiles. Just do your research.
We all make mistakes. All of us make mistakes.
Of course.
I still, if I look right here, I have a glass cage still, which, we'll say we're not going to get into that. It's a whole other discussion. One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made owning boas is to get an aquarium. And for years I thought it was okay. Even when I worked at the zoo, people had it. It's like, well, okay, but that was one of the biggest mistakes I made. But once I started realizing, well, it's really difficult to maintain this humidity. It's not getting good ventilation. We're risking respiratory issues. I added a fan. I mean, it cost me more money to make adjustments to make those glass cages livable than it would have been to just buy an 8-foot, PVC and throw a ceramic heat emitter or a radiant heat panel in there. So it's making mistakes is how we learn. And the people that are going to attack others for making those mistakes, I don't respect that. I'm very opinionated with, certain things. If I see blatant obesity and people get defensive and say, well, not to bring him up again, but I swear this name comes up every time I see an obese snake. Brian did this. Brian said I have a, I'm like, I don't know Brian. Okay. He seems like a very nice guy. And a lot of people that watch his channel, if you say anything negative against him, you're a hater. I promise you, I do not hate him. I wish, listen, he's a multimillionaire from what he's doing. I'm not jealous of that. Am I jealous that I don't have multi-millions? Yes, but I'm not jealous of him for that. I don't get angry about that stuff. What I want to see is people like Troy and people like some of the people that I've been able to talk to. I want their voices to be heard. And I want people to stop getting led down the path of just certain things that are really bad. And that's what I don't like about people like him. Mm-hmm. But again, if you attack people, they're not going to learn. People come to me every day and I'm nobody. Okay. I'm no one, I have 4,000 followers on YouTube. Woo. I'm nobody, but people come to me because I've gone to other people and they can just tell by talking to me that at least I know enough that I can help them. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go, oh, you do what and feed what? Nah. I'm not going to attack them personally. I've made mistakes. We all make mistakes. So guys, don't be afraid to ask for help and mm-hmm. don't be ashamed of the mistakes you made. Learn from them and grow. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. I felt that was my pedestal moment.
No, that was great. So I just wanted to finish off this feeding cycle because I hope we didn't confuse people more than anything, and some people may have not been exposed to it and then go, whoa, what the hell? I'm not supposed to be feeding in December and January. So Troy, maybe you could lay out just kind of a rough direction for someone if they wanted to start trying fasting and trying it out to see if it works for them.
Sure.
For their animals, not for them. It's good to fast too as a person, but
oh yeah, no, definitely. No, I think if you want to, start implementing fasting into your feeding regime, I encourage you to do it because, like I said, I encourage everyone to do it because, like I said, I believe a lot of snakes are obese. But the biggest thing is how long do we fast? When is it? When are we introducing this animal into starvation? When are we going too far where this animal's become emaciated, which I'll tell you right now, it's going to take a long time. I've seen snakes go years without food and not lose, 20% of their body weight. and you'd be amazed on what snakes' capabilities are for lowering their metabolism during these fasting periods.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a snake or a study that was done with timber rattlesnakes, where the timber rattlesnake, I forget how long it was fasted for, but its metabolic rate decreased by 76%.
Wow.
Which we're talking about reptiles that already have an amazingly low metabolic rate. And when you fasted it and it decreased by 76%, that is just, it's amazing. So one, don't be scared about fasting your snake. Your snake, they have the ability to adapt their metabolism based on food intake. So I would say, start slow and watch your animal's behavior. I definitely recommend weighing your animal before getting into fasting, because I think your animal should not lose 10% of its body condition during fasting. If it loses 10% of body condition, that's a little concerning, just because the toll it's physically going to take, the physical toll it's going to take on that animal. So I say, if you got a ball python at home, try fasting it just for 3 months during the winter period. Maybe decrease temperatures by 5 degrees during that time to aid in that decrease in metabolic rate. And just see what happens with your snake. You might notice that the snake comes out of it with increased activity levels once you start feeding again. The snake is more physically fit, has a better body condition, and has been neurologically stimulated during that time. Just because it's something new, it's a novel experience for that snake. And instinct is also telling it that it potentially needs to, go into a state of estivation, which is also natural for that animal, and is going to be neurologically stimulating, which again is also healthy. So I encourage everyone to give it a try.
Yeah, and that's kind of the advice that I give as well. Try it out, and then every couple of weeks, get them on the scale. Use your eyes to prove to yourself that these, I have never seen my snakes lose a gram of weight over something as short as 60 days, like maybe 5 grams, something like that.
Oh gosh!
And if you catch them after they've just drunken, a big gulp of water, sometimes they're even more than when you started, and you go, what the hell? So the scale is huge for you personally as the keeper to just feel calm, because all of a sudden your mind starts playing tricks. You're like, is that their skeleton showing? And when you put them on the scale, you're like, oh, they're the exact same. And even if you start by skipping 2 meals in a row, right? Just in the winter months, just maybe instead of, if you're going every 2 weeks, maybe just go 6 weeks, just start with that. And then a year after that, you can extend it if you're very uncomfortable trying it out.
Oh man, I have this total anthropomorphic theory about when it comes to feeding snakes, where when we feel like a lot of people talk about ball pythons and how they go on these feeding strikes. And, I believe, this is again, totally anthropomorphic of me, that when you offer a ball python a rat like once a week, reptiles or animals in general are very in tune with their internal clock or biological clock. And so it knows that Tuesday is feeding day. And so it gives it more of an opportunity to skip a meal, because it knows that in a week there's going to be another one. But if you purposely don't feed it that Tuesday, you just, in theory, enriched that animal, because now it's saying, oh, what the heck? Where's my Tuesday rat? So now I'm going to go looking for that Tuesday rat because it was not presented to me. Again, super anthropomorphic, but potentially neurologically stimulating or enriching.
Well, it's no wonder the randomness of a stimulus is important. And, my actual job is a swim coach, and that is a really important part of training athletes, is you cannot do the same thing over and over and expect the same result. Eventually, the body gets very good at the stimulus you're providing it. So if you're providing it like a 4 or 5 block week of really hard training, you're going to get a training response. But if you just repeat that again, the training response will be less than the first time, because the body becomes more efficient at doing what you're asking it to do. And so I wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of analogous across most of life, is that the body does prepare for things. And if you have a feeding schedule that's every single Tuesday, the body's going to be more and more efficient and recognize those signals. And it's going to skip a meal, and you're going to end up wasting a lot of money. And then people really freak out when their snakes don't eat. So go random. Random is key.
Yep.
All right. Well, do you have anything else to say?
I'm sorry, I didn't know where you wanted to take it. There was one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and again, maybe Troy can correct me if I'm wrong. This is the best explanation I've gotten, and it might be a layman's explanation, but I think a lot of people that are watching are not going to be herpetologists, so maybe that's beneficial. But the way it was explained to me best, and so a lot of it I read in the book you were Ben Russo's book, I think is really good.
And complete boa, yeah.
And there's multiple opinions of multiple people, and a lot of it goes with the things that I've heard. My vet is he was a herpetologist for 15 years in South America, working with boas, pythons. I'm trying to get him on. He's bound down by the college he's with, but basically the best layman's explanation I got was, in the wild they have the wet season and they have the less wet season, the dry season, and certain times a year, there's a lot more food present. It's a lot more available to them. So they're going to eat majority of their meals during that time. And then when the dry season comes around, maybe they, have a good spot and they eat frequently. But realistically, over the course of that time, they're going to eat little or they're going to eat nothing. So, a lot of people say that, we can do things better in captivity than we can in the wild. Well, when you have an animal that is completely geared up from an evolutionary standpoint to go months without food, and then you provide it lots more food and lots less space to get that food in, that combination is a recipe for obesity. We're putting these animals in cages where they have no enrichment or little enrichment, and then we're shoving food in their face, and they're not going to turn down a meal. I mean, you can get a couple people to say, mine won't eat if they're not hungry, whatever. But realistically, they're going to continue to eat, whether they are hungry or not, whether
especially
they
boas.
Especially boas. And I don't know much about food cycle. I've gotten people ask about reticulated pythons and stuff, but the best explanation I was given was just that we're taking that wild aspect of their feeding, and there's not going to be a regular schedule in the wild. And they're also going to eat things that might be too big, or maybe they're too small, whatever, but maybe they're too big. And what we can do is we can take that and we can replicate it in a way that is safer for the animal by not providing things that are too big, by keeping an eye on the weight. I weigh them before. I try to get it after they've defecated, so I'm not, jumping up on their size, but I try to weigh them. I look at them. I take them out and gauge their response. I see their activity levels. I mean, this year I have one fasting for 8 weeks. I have two fasting from November 15th-ish till roughly March. But, I look at those basic guidelines that I think are decent to start, and I go off of there. And basically I say, okay, so she's on large rats. 3 to 4 weeks is probably a pretty safe bet. And then I try, let's say 4 weeks. And I do that for a few months. I don't get really good results. Maybe we'll scale it back, or in the other way, maybe I'll feed less. But I'll take a chart like that and just find a range that is relatively safe, that I know chances are not a lot of damage is going to be done. And I'm going to start on the safe side and feed a little bit less. They're not going to starve. You're not going to kill them. They're boas. They're going to go. I mean, if she stopped eating right now in a year, she'd probably be a little skinny, but I don't think she'd be that affected. But I take that and then I just go off of their body. I go off of how, like, the Guyana was supposed to fast from November till January, get one meal, and then like 6 weeks again, also like reduced food. But I didn't feel that she was quite ready for that this year, even though initially I did. So she's going to go 8 weeks, see how she is. And then next year I'll probably go longer. So there's a lot of adjustments that are made. And I think there's a lot of good that we can take from behaviors in the wild and making it better and safer in captivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I'm going to add to that if you don't mind, Dylan.
Absolutely.
Which another concept of that aspect is, dietary cycling in regards to reproduction. A lot of people, when they talk about breeding snakes, talk about, thermocycling and cooling these animals in order to, stimulate spermatogenesis or vitellogenesis in their males and females, when, a lot of it as well, to these animals that live in areas that don't go through crazy temperature fluctuations in their part of the world, but they go through a dry and wet season where there is decreased food availability. When that food availability increases, will also trigger the cycling in males and females. And so sometimes you can simply get animals to breed just by going through that dietary cycling. I do it a lot with monitor lizards and a lot of the other smaller lizards that I work with. Just fasting them for or decreasing their food intake for a month, and then in the spring just pounding them with food availability can really stimulate breeding as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, different environmental stimulus can cause sort of the same biological effects.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to add a disclaimer. I do know that a lot of, Russo, this food cycling stuff is in the breeding area of his book. So I understand that a lot of people do it because of breeding. I have no intentions of breeding. I've seen benefits to it. I see realistic benefits from the wild to captivity, but I do understand that a lot of people do this for breeding purposes. So, I don't want people to think that I'm taking that out of context there, but I see benefits, so I do it even though I'm not planning on breeding. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because you're right. In Vin's book, you do have to scroll back to the breeding side to get the information on fasting, where if you read the husbandry section of that book, it's just feed a rat every 2 weeks, which I always thought was kind of weird. But and I get that, because we're trying to stimulate those breeding cycles. But like we were already saying, most snakes are overfed, so skipping a couple meals in the cooler months is not a big problem at all. So I think we'll start slowly working towards wrapping up here. I did want, was there anything else, Nick, that you for sure wanted to cover? I know you had a few questions.
Yeah, I got a list here. I don't remember all of them. I didn't get to write them all down. There was one that was, like humidity with anacondas. Troy, you've got a big cage. I can tell what I do. Do you, with having the big water feature, is humidity on the dry side something you really pay attention to, or is it, if it gets down to 20%, she has a pond?
Yeah, sure. Humidity is a very important aspect of reptile keeping that a lot of people overlook and think they can supplement just by misting or soaking on the animal, or soaking the animal, misting on the animal, soaking the animal. When really, humidity plays an important role not only for scale health, but also for hydration of the animal through respiration. That's where a lot of these animals are getting their hydration from, is just breathing in that humid air. And so, yeah, you can supplement hydration or fix the hydration of the animal by offering a pool, or offering, soaking them, or encouraging drinking, forced drinking every now and again by dripping water on their head or something like that, which is fine. But, again, I would like to offer that little slice of nature, the little slice of wild. And if I can offer the exact humid levels or humidity levels that they would be exposed to in the wild, I'm going to try to do that. So at the zoo, I'm fortunate enough to have a wonderful HVAC system for my entire building that keeps it at a constant, 60 to 80% humidity and 74 degrees year round, and which is wonderful. Yeah, which a lot of people don't. But then, within the enclosure, the large water source, and I also have a heat exchanger on the water source with filtration that, keeps my water temps around 84 to 86 degrees, which simply through evaporation is going to increase humidity. I also have my anaconda at the zoo on a bioactive setup, which is, we have 90% of our exhibits are bioactive. Which when you have a damp substrate, that also is increasing humidity. I do have a live tree in the enclosure, which live plants are going to increase humidity. But that's, not a luxury that everyone can do with giant snakes. And I'm amazed that she has not destroyed this tree within the past 2 years, because it's not the biggest tree. There's
worse
been
than cats.
Enclosure. Oh gosh, yeah. People say that lizards are destructive too. Vivarium snakes are so destructive.
Mine, I keep my humidity. I mean, it's usually between 70 and 80%, give or take.
Yeah.
If she goes up to the shelf, and I do want to I want to show this real quick so people can see before we go. But when she goes up on the shelf's probably like 50%. So she's got the option. She can go in the water. She can have that, probably 60 to 80% that you were talking about. And then some of the elevated areas are a little lower. So she needs to dry herself a little bit. I think it's important for anacondas to be able to dry a little bit as well. Not
definitely
dry, but so
not dehydrate, but
right.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing that I can remember off the top of my head was, I know they were asking about the importance of UVB. I know like boas, we're sticking with anacondas, I just added a UVB to this one, and that you can't see it, but there's the 8-foot one for my Surinames right here. And I added a couple little, cause I want to put some plants in here too. So I got it set up to where I can put some real lily pads in the water. Mm-hmm. But I guess they were asking about the benefits of UVB light for boas, anacondas, even if it's not necessary, if it's something that should be done.
I encourage to put UV over every single animal. Now recent studies are proving that, yes, it is beneficial. Yes, it actually does something to these animals. These animals, benefit from it. But, every animal, again, in the wild is exposed to UV, so it's not going to hurt them. If anything, it can benefit them. And so, you just have to be careful again with the amounts that you're offering, because you can definitely overexpose animals to UV. But I've seen a lot of snakes benefit from UV and bask in UV. We offer UV to our green mambas at the zoo. And I'll tell you right now, they dramatically change in color when exposed to UV. So I say, yes, if you have the capabilities to do so, do it.
Yeah. I would totally second that. And as long as the snake has shade and areas to get away from the UV, like you're saying, they are just remarkable at self-regulating. And you do want to make sure you're choosing the right bulb that's not going to, burn them, but they know when they want that. And all you have to do is, like Troy's saying, if they have it in the wild, just add it to your enclosure and see what happens. And I promise you'll see your animal basking at it. It is insane.
Oh, for sure.
And sometimes it takes, I added UV to my carpet python, and it took him probably 6 or 7 weeks to start using it. I'm not sure if he was just uncomfortable with it, whatever. Things look different for when there's UV shining in the enclosure as well. It's going to be a totally different visual aspect for them. But now every single day he basks under it without fail. Every single day he gets underneath the UV. So, and I think the color is one of the biggest things. And most snakes will see a spike in vitamin D as well, which is going to have a bunch of immune system boosts, as well as protecting from respiratory infection and things along those lines. So yeah, I say thumbs up to UV.
That's the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think, Nick, it was one of the questions that you got was heating and lighting for large constrictors, because Dillon, as you're very aware, because they've talked about it in many of your podcasts, with the different types of infrared and the benefits we see from it for reptiles. I think that's honestly a big issue that we see with giant snakes, is the inability or difficulties that come with properly heating them, because we have them in such large enclosures and they are such large bodied snakes. It is very difficult to supply heat that's going to warm their entire body. And especially when we're only providing, heat mats and radiant heat panels that don't emit the right type of infrared, which is, not going to stimulate activity and is not going to encourage a healthy metabolism. Sets these snakes up for failure again. So I think anyone that is looking to improve upon their setups for their large constrictors should definitely explore the route of using halogen lights, as well as UV. And you're going to see a dramatic change in your animal's behavior for the benefit.
I totally agree.
There was one more that I did remember. Someone touched on, and I think this is both of these are pretty talked about, so I'm sure both of you guys would probably have an opinion. I know I have my opinion based on doing it, but glass cages, when we're talking about fish tanks, glass cages and red overnight lights, or just red lights in general. Someone asked about that, and personally, I think I've seen enough to say that I'm not going to use the red anymore. I have a couple that in the case of an emergency for a day or so, if something breaks and I don't have a replacement, which, I mean, you know, let's face it, everyone has days where that happens. It's a good backup, but continuously using, not something I'm going to do anymore based on, I think I've seen enough. It's not worth the risk it. But the glass as well. I think that I've got it to the point where it's pretty safe for them. I made adjustments. I covered the screen parts. I bought little fans that they're actually in both of these cages too, but I bought the little fans that will help circulate air. I think the airflow is good in there. It doesn't get stagnant. My humidity levels are good. My temperatures are on point, but still I will not do it again. It's something it's probably my biggest mistake, and I will not get glass cages again. They're very difficult to maintain, and the amount of money that you spend, I think that it's just not worth it. But I think a lot more people want to hear, you know, what you have to say, and of course you too, Dylan. Sorry.
For sure. Did you want to talk about it, Dylan? You want me to?
Well, I can jump on the red light real quick. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
The red lighting is kind of a strange thing because it sort of comes from the poultry farming side of things. They use red light to calm chicks down, or it helps with them like stopping pecking each other. I think, I don't know, for whatever reason. The issue with red light is snakes can see it. It's red. It does make a red glow, and so we don't know what stressor that causes. Is that going to cause stress by being constantly in this very unnatural illuminated zone? And the second thing is it's not invisible. Many people think that because it's red, it's infrared. And yes, there is infrared coming from that bulb because it is a tungsten lamp. You're going to have that, you know, near infrared wavelengths. But it's not only infrared, and by that I mean it's not just the invisible spectrum of the infrared light, meaning if you have the red light on during the night, you literally just have a red light on at night, just like, you know, the episode of Seinfeld where they go crazy because of the red light coming into the room.
Man.
And that's kind of exactly what it must be like. So the red lights are pretty much pointless, and I would say if you had to use one, I would say don't use it at night because you are interrupting the photo period. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Troy.
Yeah, I mean, I just totally agree with you. I was pretty much going to say the exact same thing you said. I know there is a kind of a folklore out there that red lights do harm reptiles, which that's not true. You know, we've debunked that. But yeah, like you said, Dylan, they totally can see it. And so I always tell people, you know, imagine if I replaced every single light bulb in your home with the red light, how would you enjoy it?
Yeah.
You know, probably wouldn't be very good. But yeah, and then, you know, removing it at night, there's so much benefit from offering reptiles a day-night cycle, a true day-night cycle where it is, you know, good visible light during the day and pitch black at night. Does a lot more for your animal than a lot of people realize. But yeah, and then getting into glass enclosures, you know, just to throw this out there, I have heard a story from my direct supervisor about a olivaceous and olive python busting the seams on a glass enclosure.
Oh my God.
So just, you know, heads up about that, I guess. But also glass is just it's just a challenge in itself. I mean, it does not hold heat well, does not hold humidity well. So you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, especially, you know, if you're trying to acquire and I'm not saying you, Nick, but you,
I know.
people acquiring glass enclosures, you know, you're just, it's going to present challenges, especially, you know, if you're trying to put a species in there that requires, you know, a decent thermal gradient within the enclosure and high levels of humidity. And if you live in Colorado and like me, where my reptile room drops down to 12%, humidity within the winter, it's you know, it's a freaking challenge. So I'd say try to go with something like expanded PVC or a plastic material or something like that. It's just going to be, you know, a lot easier on yourself and much more enjoyable.
Yeah, you can make it work, but you're going to give yourself, and everybody's different. If you have a room that you're controlling completely and you have smaller species in there, go for it. I think you could do it. But
yeah.
if you're, like, I have the same issue as you, Troy, it drops down to 10% and glass becomes an issue for sure.
I'm so happy I don't have that problem.
Yeah, Florida. You're lucky.
Screw you, guy. Just kidding.
Yeah, appreciate those humid.
Guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very different here in the winter.
Got humidifiers pumping in my reptile room.
Yo, I have 3 in here.
Yeah.
It does get a lot lower. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm totally out of that, but it's not anywhere near 12. I think right now I have one of the extra digital gauges in my room that I just stuck. It's a magnet, so I just stuck it to my desk, and I'll look at it once in a while. Like right now, it's like 48, 50. So I mean, once a week, just a little mist in there. If the numbers are dropping too low, but I try not to keep the humidity up quite as much during the winter anyway, because I am dropping their temperatures down.
Sure.
And that was a suggestion that I'd seen, and whether or not it's beneficial, they wet and cold together is kind of. But so I mean, it naturally drops and it gets around like 60. So but during the summertime, I mean, 80-90% sometimes.
Yeah, I always say if you've never been shocked by your light switch in a dry season or shocked by the carpet, like you've never experienced dry. So you always see these people on Facebook and whatnot. They're like, you should never have to mist, or you shouldn't need all this. If your enclosure set up properly, it's like you probably live in Georgia or Florida where a low humidity day is a 48%. I've seen my hydrometer read 7% before, and that is like you're gonna get shocked no matter what you touch.
Yep.
Well, I think I would love to just finish off with real quick, because I did mention earlier about the myths of the anaconda. There are so many, and 2 that jump out right away obviously are the length. That people, you hear stories of these 40-foot anacondas that are roaming the Amazon that we've never experienced. And the other thing is age. I'm not sure if you know who Terry Collin is, but I watched he's part of the Dragonwood Conservancy, I think. I'm not exactly sure what his role is, but I saw him do a little speech about anaconda, and he said he has an anaconda that he caught in 1969, and it was already 18 feet long, and he still has it today. So that was like,
wow,
however long that is, plus the fact that it was already, an 18 foot. So these are maybe like 50 or 60-year-old animals. So I was wondering, Troy, do you have any thoughts on either the longevity and the potential size?
Oh yeah, for sure. Fun little story. I think it was back in the 60s or 70s. The Bronx Zoo put out a inquiry to anyone that could bring them a 30-foot anaconda. They would pay, I think $1,000, $10,000. And this is, way back in the day. Zoos accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums don't do this anymore. But they put out an inquiry. Yeah, right. For someone to bring them a 30-foot anaconda, go catch one in the wild, whatever, and they would pay, whatever, and no one could do it. No one could find one, and so you hear all these stories about anacondas getting huge size, massive size, but they're pretty infrequent to find, especially when you're talking about the challenges of the wild, of predation and food availability. Doesn't really allow them to get those monster size like you hear about. And then as far as longevity studies are extremely difficult, because, we can make assumptions based on, metabolism and metabolic rate and protein contents and muscle tone and fat contents and all of that, and we can assume that this animal can live to this age, but in order to find out an exact longevity of a reptile, you'd have to be there at hatching, mark that animal, track that animal for its entire life, assume that it, hoping that it never gets predated upon and finds food to sustain itself, and then truly die from old age, and then do that 100 times to find an average to get a true longevity of a species. So it's extremely difficult. And so a lot of our longevity assumptions are based on captivity, and how long we've been able to keep these animals alive in a captive setting, which, again, is that truly their longevity of what you would see in the wild, or are we keeping them alive longer, or is it shorter in captivity? It's very difficult to say. So, Yeah.
Hence the mystery. It's actually better that it's just a mystery. People like the mystery.
It is. I mean, I think I can confidently say that most snakes can live into their 20s.
Yeah.
I think some snakes can definitely live longer than that. But I really think that it is in strong correlation with feeding regimes and how fast you grow that snake. At Denver Zoo, we're currently doing a study with growth rates and longevity on Komodo dragons, because there's actually Komodo dragons in a captive setting die at a very young age, mainly with females due to reproductive complications, and males from arthritis and gout. And nobody really knows why. One theory that we have is that we're growing them too quickly, because nobody knows how fast a Komodo dragon grows in the wild. Because again, it's a very difficult study to do. And surprisingly, we know very little about wild Komodo dragons. And so we're growing them at a very reduced growth rate to potentially, see if they live longer. Now, this is obviously going to be a very long-term study, but we'll see what happens,
Interesting. Yeah, it is definitely a difficult question to answer. Well, I think we've covered a ridiculous amount of topics tonight, so that was awesome. Nick, did you want to just quickly give us a pan of the enclosure there? I know you wanted to show us, and maybe you could show the viewers what kind of ridiculous setup you have in the back, because it is really amazing for a home system.
All right, so I'm going to do my best because it's front facing right now. So this is the pond. I don't know how well you guys, I'm trying to look. Actually, I'm going to unplug it. I'll plug easier. So this is the pond. It's probably about 20, 22 inches deep, something like that, depending on how full the water line is. She loves being under, these are fake right now, but she loves being under here, and she'll put her head right there. She's been on this probably 3 or 4 times, but she loves that cubby. Mm-hmm. And if you guys can you guys see the top up here where my finger's pointing?
Yep.
So she'll stretch out up there, and, because there's a ceramic heat emitter, and then radiant heat panel. So, and then you can come see, there's a little viewing area. I gotta say who did this, because he's phenomenal. You got to go on Facebook, Habitat and Design Pet Supplies. He was amazing. I mean, he was a newcomer, and he did such a wonderful job.
That is such a insane enclosure for a private keeper to have. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
It looks like a zoo.
When I tell you I wanted this animal since I was 9 years old, I wasn't, and honestly, like, I don't know if you guys can see, but she's got this cave right here. So I had him do it flat so she could bask up there. Mm. And then that cave, she loves hiding in that cave during the day. So, it's there's 3 separate thermostats from Herpstat. And I keep different range of temperatures. The humidity, like right now the door's open, so it says 70, but the high today was 86. The temperature in there right now on the floor is 82. Usually in the cave, it's about 2 degrees cooler. And then up top is the hottest spot. Like right here, if she wants to go, that's usually around 88 to 90. And then the water temperature is roughly, I don't know, 82 degrees or so. But I've got a nice big water filter on there. And actually, Troy helped me a lot with the water because, I wasn't sure how it needed to be done. I wasn't sure how it needed to be cleaned, how often, and all that stuff. Because, we changed their water out, every other day or so. So what he told me was that when dealing with the water is drained partially because the good bacteria builds up. And it wasn't just him, but he helped me a lot. The good bacteria builds up in the filtration system. So I have an FX6 filter from Blue Vol, and that helps circulate the water under here. I've been having one little issue with leaking from the water. I think I put something in wrong. So the waterfall kind of leaks a little bit. So it's not on 24/7, but between the waterfall that has a small filter and the water filter itself, the water gets circulated. And then I usually test the water a couple times a week just to make sure the ammonia levels aren't too high. I use like a water conditioner that brings down ammonia. But even when she defecates, I have to keep an eye out for it because because of the volume of water, it doesn't get real dirty. So I usually do about 10 to 15% water changes minimum a week. And it's really not difficult for those who are saying, oh, I don't want to do it. You plop the thing in, drain it a little bit, and then run the hose in and whatever, that's it. So about 15% every week. I test, if I see the ammonia levels are high, she probably peed in there. So I'll drain it 25, 30% and then add a little bit more water back. And then when she defecates, we fish it out. I have one of those vacuum things that you put in aquariums and just get some of the debris around there. And I do a 50% water change when she defecates, and the ammonia levels will spike. Troy, you told me that. The ammonia levels will spike, but once you replace some of that water, and especially when the filtration circles it through with the good bacteria, I don't know all the science behind it, but the levels aren't ever high. And thus far, I haven't had any problems. It's honestly less maintenance for that than the other big cage I have because of the drainage issues. So that was it.
Man, that is an unbelievable enclosure. That's definitely was not cheap, but I'm sure the anaconda obviously
wasn't that bad.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was expensive, and my credit card bill now with getting a new job is not helping me, but it wasn't as bad as you think. For something, and you know, this is an animal you're going to have for 30 years, probably 20, 25, 30. So I mean, again, my goal is an 18, 12, 8. And hopefully in the next couple of years, I can buy a larger house, and that's the plan. But the reason I got something this big was in the case of a COVID situation where, oops, now I have no job. You know, I'm not going to wake up one day and go, oh man, I have a 15-foot snake in an 8-foot cage and she can't move. So at least she's going to have this forever. Worst case scenario, I feel good about that. If I can get when I get something bigger, it'll be better. And we'll repurpose this a little bit for a different species, or maybe I'll let it go for really cheap so someone else can give their anaconda a really awesome life. But it wasn't as expensive as you guys would think. And it's a very, very small price to pay overall. And if I couldn't do this, I would not have an anaconda. Some people might not think that that's, you know, something they want to do. But I can't turn this light off. But I mean, some people might not feel that way. But for me, if I can't give them something like this, all my boas are getting 8-foot cages, except for the emerald. So if I can't do it, if I can't afford a nice, big sized, healthy, good enrichment enclosure, I can't afford that animal. That's my thought process.
I think that is the correct philosophy. So, Nick, can you let everybody know where they can find you? Because I know the listeners, if they're listening on the podcast, they're absolutely going to want to go check out this enclosure. So let them know the Instagram and the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so actually I have a lot. This is the big one. I have another one right behind the camera here. There's full walkthroughs of all that. I wish I could show you the other one. It's just the same color as this. Very, very nice. Same type of rock and everything. And my smaller Surinam's going to eventually go in there. It's going to be really awesome. But I have a few more 8-foot enclosures coming next week from Animal Plastics, finally. So hopefully once everything gets going again, I'll be doing a lot more walkthroughs with the enclosures, especially as the new ones come in. They're not going to be as extravagant as this until, you know, things get better with the job and everything coming up. But yeah, my YouTube is Thicker Constrictor, Thicker Constrictor. Yeah, well, say what you want about that. I was not prepared for some reason for my Instagram. I don't use it as much, but if you go on my YouTube, you can actually look at my Instagram from Thicker Constrictor also, but that's not the username or whatever. So, but it's the link and everything is on my YouTube, and I'm sure you can find it with that. So
awesome. And what about yourself, Troy? Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram under Zookeeper Troy. And yeah, I mean, anyone listening, feel free to reach out, ask questions. I can talk about reptiles all day. So I love it when people message me and, you know, have questions about Komodo dragons or whatever. So feel free.
Gosh, I knew that.
You just opened up a can of worms.
I know.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for spending the 2 hours with me. We went over time, but I knew that this would probably be a very diverse conversation, and it was. So I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Anytime.
So much fun. I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
That sounds good to me. And that brings us to the end of that episode. Troy and Nick, thank you so much for spending the 2 hours with me. That was a really interesting conversation. I'm sure, like we said at the beginning, it might, ruffle a few feathers, but I think it's actually a very important conversation to be had. As we always say, we want to be moving the hobby forward, and that's how we do that with conversations like this. So thank you very much. And if you are looking for any more information on today's guests, make sure you head to animalsathome.network.com and click on the Animals at Home banner and you'll find this episode. In the show notes, I do have links to Instagram as well as YouTube for Nick. And I also included a link to the paper that Troy discussed about fasting. So specifically, that was the paper that looked at the effect fasting had on body mass. So it was a really interesting paper. I do have it linked there. Now, I think it is behind a paywall. I do fortunately have access to a university database, so I was able to pull it out for free. But if you don't, you can at least go read the abstract and you'll have the title and the author there. Now, next week, my guest shares some really great tips to access papers if you don't have access to a university database. So make sure you tune in next week so you can save the title and the author's name, and then hopefully that information that we get next week will help you find the paper somewhere where you can take a look. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you did enjoy this, make sure you share it. I hope this was a great conversation starter for many of you. And if you are looking for more information on Animals at Home, make sure you head to animalsathome.network.com. You can also pick yourself up an Animals at Home t-shirt at animalsathome.ca/shop. Thank you very much to customreptilehabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. There is affiliate links in both the YouTube description box as well as the show notes. I will talk to you guys next week.